This episode of the Pedalshift Project is brought to you by Hawbuck Dyneema Wallets. On your next bike tour, leave the bulk at home and keep just the cash and cards you need in a super strong, ultralight wallet. Learn more about the tech behind the wallet at hawbuck.camp. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/156, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or call the voicemail hotline 202-930-1109. Check out Pedalshift out on most of the socials as well. Hello, everybody on YouTube. Hello, everybody on the podcast. We are live, baby, live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining. This is Tim Mooney, and my voice is back, which I'm super excited about. I talked about at the beginning of the show, kind of in the pre-show ramble with the folks in the chat room, that the virus that sort of attacked my vocal cords was unrelenting, and it really wasn't until I would say yesterday, and really more so today, that I feel like I'm in the 90% range, but we'll see how long that goes. I've got my tea here. I'm showing that to the chat room, and I am hopefully going to have enough voice to get us through this roughly hour of programming here. This is the wrap-up show for the Great Cross Florida Tour. It's been a really fun time pulling all of this together. I mean, the tour itself was great, but it's been really fun to pull these podcasts together in what I am kind of colloquially referring to as hashtag Florida Week. One of the consequences of the viral attack on my vocal cords was that I could not get the first show out on the Thursday 7 a.m. slot that I normally did. So we have been doing 3 shows in a row. We went Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday of this very week. So starting on Sunday, and now here we are on a Friday. And this is the 4th thing regarding the Florida tour. So I'm happy to have brought you Florida Week, or hashtag Florida Week, because it was a heck of a tour, and I'm excited to kind of wrap it all up and give you some thoughts and ideas and my usual takeaways and all that other kind of good stuff. If you are listening to this and you would like to see me talking into a microphone and see my Brompton over my shoulder, go to youtube.com/pedalshift and go check it out. This will be the live show, Pedalshift Live number 156, and you can watch me talk into a mic doing thrilling microphone technique. So first things up, before we really kick into the show, we'll do some housekeeping. We'll talk about the Florida ride, and then we're going to do the Ask Me Anything segments. And I've got a bunch of good questions. For those of you who are in the chat room or who are otherwise listening live, shoot me either an email, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or throw your questions into the chat box for the Ask Me Anything segment. And it can be bike touring, which is sort of the whole point of the show. But I answered questions about, let's see, I think Marvel versus DC last time. I think there was a Star Wars question in there, and we have a music-based question on this episode as I scroll through the AMA. It's mostly bike touring, but I am willing to submit myself to the AMA, I don't know, meme, motif, whatever it is. Ask me anything. All right, let's start off with some housekeeping. First off, I want to say is to mark your calendars. We announced this, I think, a couple of shows ago, but I'm super excited about this. We are going to be doing the Pedalpalooza ride in Portland, Oregon, Friday, June 14th. This is going to be the first ever podcast Palooza ride. This is going to be in conjunction with the Sprocket podcast, the Joyride podcast, and hopefully some more folks as well. This is a thematic ride. We have not done any actual work in figuring out where it's going to end up or how it's going to work out. But what the idea behind all of this is that there's going to be a podcast component to it. There's obviously a biking component, and hopefully some beer components to it as well, or whatever beverage you would like to drink. So that's going to be coming. Save the date. Mark your calendars, kids. Friday, June 14th. Everyone is welcome. Free event, of course, as I think everything is in Pedalpalooza. I mentioned this before. I used to live, as many of you know, in Portland, Oregon. And I think the day after I moved, Pedalpalooza started, or at least that year. And I've never actually been to a Pedalpalooza. So I thought, hey, I've got a great idea to actually make one this year. And that is to organize a ride or co-organize a ride. So check that out, Friday, June 14th. And we'll be talking a lot more about details coming in future episodes, and many more details coming this spring. I got some other really cool, interesting events. I don't really do an events calendar for other folks, but these folks I've actually worked with before, and that's Annalisa and Eric. I'm sorry, it's Annalisa. I did this at the DC events too. For some reason, I have this Canadian portion of my brain that pronounces things like Canadians, and she pronounces it Annalisa, but I say Annalisa all the time. So it's Annalisa and Eric. They're back on the road for that Miles of Portraits thing that they've been doing. So we did a couple of events here in DC that I did the emceeing for, but now they're doing something even cooler. They're going to be out on the West Coast. They're going to be in Los Angeles. They're going to be Arizona, New Mexico. But the cool thing is they're going to be actually doing a tour through all these states, stopping off at REIs along the way, doing their Miles of Portraits stuff. Go check that out, milesofportraits.com/events. I'm super jealous because they're doing a little piece of the Southern Tier route, which it's been intriguing to me for a very long time. So go check them out. It's a really cool show. And they also are selling their magazine as well, which is super cool. And it's got all the pictures and all the portraits of the people that they met. It's really inspiring stuff. And you've heard all about them. They've been on the show before. So go check it out. milesofportraits.com/events. Also wanted to give a shout out to the sponsor for the last few episodes and for the next couple as well. That's Hawbuck Dyneema Wallets. I carried one on the Florida ride, and this thing was really cool. I really enjoyed using it. Wes, the guy who kind of runs the whole show there, he's a very cool dude. Go check out his stuff over at Hawbuck Camp. It's one of those cool, what do they call them, top level domains, TLDs. So hawbuck.camp. I should have something written here, but I won't because this is live. I can't do that. It's in the show notes. Go check it out. If you're interested in sponsoring a show like Wes did, go to pedalshift.net/sponsor. And yeah, if it's something that's bike touring or bike touring adjacent, like these cool high-tech unstoppable wallets, man, let's talk. Pedalshift.net/sponsor. Speaking of supporting the show, Pedalshift Society. So lately there's been some bugs in the system, but I have actually fixed them. So how do I know this? Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, and Dan Gebhardt, all within the last few days, have actually joined the Pedalshift Society since I have actually fixed it like today. So if you're interested in supporting the show through the Pedalshift Society, especially if you were clicking madly away going, I want to support the show on a monthly basis, $1, $2, $5 a month, something like that. Guess what? It works now. So go check that out. That's pedalshift.net/society and help support the show. It literally makes tours like what I'm going to talk about possible. No lying right there. It's Pedalshift Society that helps make that happen. Speaking of tours, like I'm going to be talking about, I also shot a metric crap ton of video, and it's going to be coming soon. I have literally not touched it yet because hashtag Florida Week was dominated with audio editing to get ready so that I could get them all out before the live show wrap up. So I'm going to be doing the video editing probably in the next week or so. So I'll make sure I get that all out in the newsletter, folks. You'll get it. I'll put it out on social. I'll talk about it on the pod as well. I got some cool video, some really interesting stuff. And I'm looking forward to editing that all together. I don't know how many episodes it's going to end up being. I tend to not like making them super, super long. And there may be, good dynamic breaks in there. I don't know. We'll have to see how that all goes. But Florida videos coming soon to a YouTube near you. Last but not least, in housekeeping, great things are coming in March. I got some really cool interviews lined up. We're going to be checking in with Steve again for the beginner series and a whole lot more. I'm really excited about how the show has just kicked off 2019 with a bang, and March is no different. So stay tuned for that newsletter. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, I'll do a little bit of a preview of upcoming shows when I put out the March newsletter, when it should come out at the beginning of the month, unlike the February newsletter, which just came out like yesterday or 2 days ago or something like that. I'll do better. I was sick. I had no voice. Pity me. Come on. All right, that's it for housekeeping, a stupid, lengthy housekeeping section. Next up on the show, the Cross Florida Tour Takeaways. As many of you know, and if you've listened to the last 3 episodes, that's episodes number 153, 154, and 155, I bicycled across the great state of Florida earlier in the month, and I have a ton of takeaways from it. I think that the biggest thing that I would say as just sort of a threshold matter, I had never done any bike touring in Florida, and I had heard a variety of different things. Keith Spangler, who I had on the show, talked up Florida, and I had heard good things about it from people like Keith. I'd heard a lot of bad things from people who had had rough experiences in on certain roads. So I just didn't know what to expect. My takeaway, at least through Central Florida, where I bicycled, is I think it's a good bike touring state. And what's really interesting to me about the state of Florida is how many amazing trails there are. Now, I only got on about 5.5, 6 miles of the Van Fleet Trail, which apparently is, I think, about 60 miles that runs north-south through Central Florida. Beautiful, wide trail, really nicely paved. I think that the trail infrastructure in Florida is really, really well done in a lot of places. And of course, I had also learned prior to this trip that there is a mostly trail-based way to cross Central Florida. It takes a little bit of a different route than what I was wanting to do. And as I talked about, I think on the preview episode, I had kind of already committed to the route and the towns that I was planning to spend the nights in, which is why I didn't end up kind of deviating from it. And I'm glad that I did the route that I did, because I can always go back and do trails. I like that I kind of, threw the hat over the wall, as the old Irish proverb says, and did the roads that some of which seemed were a little bit questionable. They ended up working out really well. I thought that the road riding, for the ones that I did at least, the roads that I was on, the roads that I pedaled on, I think that they were quite good. Many of them had great infrastructure, so we had really good wide shoulders, sometimes 5-6 feet wide. Many of them designated specifically as being bike trail, not bike trails, but bikeways, bike paths, bike lanes. So I thought that was really, really good. And when there weren't bike lanes specifically, there was one of two things that was available to. The first thing was there was a sidewalk, and that was largely true in kind of the urban or suburban areas that I was going through. And I don't typically like riding on sidewalks, but I think that given the circumstances of what the riding would have been otherwise, I would have been in a very high speed, bikes not really seen kind of roads. And so I had no problems being on the sidewalks. I also get the impression that in Florida, riding on the sidewalks in a lot of areas is kind of, well, it's what's done. So, I found that that was a good way, and it was good infrastructure that was there. And I thought it worked really, really well. When there weren't sidewalks and when there wasn't a shoulder, I was usually on some very, very rural roads. Nova Road is probably the one that I talked about the most. That was on the third day. And it was 60 miles per hour in large sections of it, which feels really, really ridiculous to say, oh, it was a great road. But the asphalt was really, really good. The drivers knew and could see you from way, way back because it was very, very straight. And with the exception of one, maybe two times, and one time actually it showed up on the podcast itself. Most people slowed down too when they went around me. They didn't just kind of maintain speed and keep going. So for the most part, I felt really good and really safe. I had the mirror, and I think for those of you on the live feed, can you see? Well, let's see. The mirror is right at the arm of my microphone is kind of blocking it. But I have a really good wide mirror, rear view mirror on the Brompton. And, that's just really, really helpful when you're on shoulderless roads to know what's coming behind you. Even though I tend to ride with earbuds in, I don't listen to anything that's so loud that I can't hear oncoming traffic from a long ways away. So, I've got all the signals. I got visual signals in my rearview mirror. I've got, of course, the oncoming sound of traffic on a high, busy road. So, it worked out really well. And, it all goes down to the original point that I was making. I think Florida is a really good bike touring state. I had no issues. I had no bad experiences. I had, like I said, a couple of, boy, I wish that person would have slowed down, or I wish this, or I wish that. But nothing that I don't get in DC or in California or in Oregon or wherever. It's just, it comes with bike touring. So Florida, for me, feels like a really, really good bike touring state. I talked about it, I think, on the preview episode, that I think Florida has really good bones for being a bike touring state. I just think that after kind of experiencing it a little bit, it's a good one. It's a good place to go to. And, I only have the one experience that I have in Central Florida, but When you look at maps and when you look at what's available, Florida does pretty well. It's a good biking state, real flat, let me tell you, except where it's not. So next point that I wanted to talk about in the takeaways section was that 3 days across Central Florida is about right, but you could do it in 2 if you wanted to. So my mileage was roughly 40 miles, 50 miles, and 60 miles, days 1 through 3. So you're talking 150 miles total from Tampa to Cocoa Beach. Now, if you wanted to add on and go to Clearwater or St. Peter, really go to the Bay, or excuse me, the Gulf of Mexico, well, that's fine. You can do that, and that's not a ton of extra riding. But let's say you're looking at 150 miles. That's 275-mile days. That's really not that bad. I found myself enjoying the fact that I took 3. I like 3-day tours. I think that 2 days sometimes is just a little too much, too fast. And 275-mile days, I don't think I would have enjoyed as much. The other thing is that if you're going to be doing a higher mileage tour, that means you need more sunlight if you don't want to be biking in the dark. Now, I banged out my miles. I left roughly right before sunrise or right around sunrise on all 3 days. And most days I was done, either 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. So I had a couple of hours of sunlight left. So I could have conceivably done probably that mileage in the time that was allotted to me. But if you're going down to Florida in the winter, which frankly I would recommend, I would not do Florida in the summer just from a heat perspective, unless you just love the tropics, man. If you love tropical riding, go for it, man. But winter for me worked out really well. Before the show, Brian Bechtel asked about the humidity and how that was, and it was fine. The temperatures were great. I had just gone through sub-zero temperatures in DC, so to get the whiplash of having 80 degrees as highs kind of felt pretty good to me. And as I talked about on the podcast, I got a ton of sun and all of that. So, for me, I wasn't impacted by the heat so much such that I think longer days wouldn't have been possible. So, yeah, I think you could probably do it in 2 days. I don't like riding much more than 70 miles in a day. Frankly, I don't like riding much more than 60, 65 in a day, fully loaded. On the Brompton, when it's loaded, I find that I can't, doing 60 is even, it feels like doing 70 on a larger, more kind of traditional touring bike that's fully loaded. Just because of the nature. It's a different kind of a ride, and I find that I'm still getting used to that. Less loaded, like I was on this trip, I had no problems. 40 miles, 50 miles, 60 miles, no problems at all. And frankly, I haven't done any actual riding of note since, let's see, when was that Pittsburgh ride? That was November. And I haven't done any real mileage since then. So, it ended up working out really, really well with the mileage that's sort of in my wheelhouse, that 50, 60 miles. But I would say if you want to do it in 2 days, you want to do 275-mile days, you can definitely do that. The ride that this tour was at least inspired by was the Space Coast Riders Tour, and they do it in 2 days. In fact, I think that there's some crazy pants that do it in 1 day, which, man, if you want to do 150 miles in a day on your speedy carbon bike, man, you go for it. I'm on a little clown bike with stuff that makes it slower. So yeah, I did it in 3. Thanks. Next up, the rural parts were the best, even though there were no shoulders. I kind of talked about this a little bit already. The shoulderless sections are, when you look on Google Maps, a little bit terrifying, right? Whether it's Google Earth or Google Maps and you're down in the street view. I do this a lot in the planning stages. I found that the shoulderless sections, if it's on a low trafficked road, actually works out just fine. There are parts of Highway 101, and I think I mentioned this on the pod as well, maybe in the day 3 pod, that, there are sections of 101 that have almost no shoulder. And, that's a major U.S. highway on the West Coast. I was on a much less trafficked road. And, as I mentioned, most of the traffic went around me, no problem. I think it's a pretty well biked path. I think that needing shoulders isn't necessary in all circumstances, but I would definitely say that you want to be a little bit more suspect of it. Look at some Strava heat maps and things like that. I think that can be really, really helpful to you as well. So, the urban parts, the suburban parts, you heard it. there's a lot of traffic going on. And there's not a lot of great scenery. Every once in a while, you'll kind of be going past like a creek or something that's kind of interesting and pretty that you would drive past and wouldn't even notice it, and it's nice and cool. And there were definitely a few spots that were like that in the suburban areas. But for the most part, it's a lot of strip malls and it's a lot of kind of craziness, especially around the touristy parts in Kissimmee. So the riding there was more utilitarian because, the idea is I want to cross Florida. So for those parts, I'm like, all right, let's just get through this. But it's enjoyable because it's part of a goal. It's part of a ride. But it was really the rural parts that I thought were the most interesting ones that were part of it. Question in the chat box from GT. Do you do much recreational riding when at home or focus more on commuting locally and then tours? I think that's a good question. It's pretty relevant in this area because let me make it kind of relevant to this section here. I tend to do some recreational riding around here, but I tend to like longer rides rather than short rides. During good weather, I like to go out on the C&O Canal Towpath and go out to Great Falls. And that works out really, really well for me because it's about a 15-mile round trip, and I'll bring a coffee with me, and I'll drink coffee and look at the waterfalls and stuff like that. And it's a good escape from the city. So that ends up working out really well. But I like doing things that more serves bike touring rather than just sort of going out for a ride. The bike shop that I frequent a lot around here, they do weekend rides. They do one called the Hills of Anacostia, which I would love to do at some point. It's just, I can never get jazzed up to do a group ride, first of all, which you guys know, I like riding by myself for the most part. But, it doesn't serve a purpose for me, except for maybe staying more in bike shape. So maybe, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud as I talk about all of this, but in any event, I think that commuting. You're looking at my office right now. It's here. So my commute is I walk from the bedroom into the living room. So I don't have much of a commute to speak of, but I do ride my bike a lot for grocery shopping and stuff like that. So functional stuff, and then I do some recreational stuff, but. Frankly, I live for the bike touring. In between tours, I'm thinking about new tours. So anyways, thanks for the question. Next up on the Florida Tour Takeaways, use sunscreen and cover up. Oh my goodness. Okay, I talked about this in the pre-show, I think a little bit. I got pretty scorched on this ride because I didn't bring any sunscreen with me because sunscreen goes bad over time. The chemical nature of it kind of wears off. If you listen to some people say that sunscreen is garbage and totally worthless anyways, but longer story. I like using it because I do find that it has some efficacy for me. What I tend to do the most, though, is I tend to cover up. I wear the sun sleeves, and I try, if it's not too hot and muggy, wear long pants to make sure that I'm covered up. And that, frankly, works out pretty well. In Missouri last year, it was just too hot to be totally covered up, so I went with shorts. On this ride, day 1, I went to shorts, but days 2 and 3, I stuck with the long pants, and I'm glad that I did that because I really got too much sun on my legs on the first day. So, everybody's got different kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Your ability to withstand the sun varies from person to person. So I found myself when I was younger, I could withstand it a little bit better, but now, I don't really like having too much sun exposure. So what was strange to me was I expected there to be sunscreen like just everywhere in Florida. And actually all of day 2, I was looking for a place to get sunscreen. And when I was in gas stations and expected to find it, it wasn't there, which was crazy. Because I really, really wanted it and couldn't find it. I didn't get any until the beginning of day 3 in Kissimmee, which was kind of a touristy area in that big major stretch there on Orange Blossom Trail. So eventually I was able to get covered up, and I'm glad I did, and it worked out really well. But I would say, watch your sun exposure. I find that sun exposure for me, and I think it does for most people as well, really saps your strength, really can make what could be a good ride in nice weather unenjoyable when all is said and done. So cover up, use sunscreen. I know I sound like your dad, but anyways, here I am. Sunscreen. Next up, this was the biggest surprise for me. If you've listened to the show for 150 some odd episodes, you know that my primary thing about bike touring is I love camping. That was sort of my original, marrying camping and bicycling long distance is just sort of a big dream for me in so many ways. So, I've never done a tour where camping wasn't the majority of my overnights. Yes, I've done hotels and I've done some other things where an actual roof over the head was a part of the tour, but camping is the central focus of it. Having just now done a tour that is all lodging based, I get it. It's a lot easier, man. I don't have to think about charging up stuff every night. I can charge up my phone. I can have full batteries, all of that. I don't have to carry as much stuff. I don't have to worry about cooking. I don't have to worry about all those various things. So for those of you who are listening to this show, who are inspired to do bike touring, but are less inclined to get into camping, well, I mean, obviously you don't have to do camping. And, if what turns a crank is going forward and going out there and making sure that you're enjoying the ride, but not doing the camping, it's fine. It's great. It all works out. All right. Quick question from the chat box. Ray Jackson asks, what did you do with the Brompton when you needed to go into a store or take a bio break? Great question. The first thing that I did with the Brompton, and most people who ride on Bromptons will say, fold it up and take it with you wherever you go. And if I didn't have a big Ortlieb pannier attached to the front luggage block, I probably would do that. It takes almost no time to fold it up and carry a bike in with you. It's a little on the heavy side. You can roll it around. It's fine. So yeah, it's always more secure to have your bike with you. But because I got my pannier on the front of it, and it's more trouble than it's worth. So I brought a folding lock. I used to have a really great cinch lock, which I lost in Missouri, and I'm just devastated because I want that back. It was also orange, which, as you all know, is my favorite color. But I've got a folding lock, which did a pretty good job. I'm going to rotate, for those of you who are watching on the video, the triangle where you can't really see it with the bike folded. The triangle on a Brompton is really, really, really teeny tiny. So doing the actual locking sometimes the geometry can be a little bit tricky, but I locked up every single time. I would never trust this bike in particular, any bike really, without locking it up, at least, the rear tire to the frame itself. But with this bike, since it's so portable, I think that I protect it a little bit more than any other bike that I've ever owned. Ray said it fits nicely in a grocery cart. That's totally true. I was never in any place that was a big grocery store with this bike on this trip. I'm thinking back to the California ride I did a few years ago, going up through Big Sur. I don't think I was in a big grocery store or, a Safeway or anything like that on that trip either. But I certainly would consider taking it in. Once it's folded up, most people don't really care about it. Like in a lot of places, if you have a full-size bike and you roll it in, they'll be like, oh, you can't bring your bike in here, blah, blah, blah. But this thing, you fold it up, people are befuddled and amused and confused. So yeah, it can definitely go inside of a grocery cart if you want. It just depends on how much other stuff you've got with it. I have no problem leaving stuff out on a full-size bike, so I have no problem leaving stuff on the smaller bike. I do take valuables with me inside wherever I go. Of course, the wallet, phone, things like that. But for the most part, somebody looks at something like this and if they don't know anything about it, there's no way anybody could unfold this and ride away. So in any event, I locked it up and I was happy doing it. Sandy Pizzio. Hello, Sandy. I've successfully used a 60-inch auto lock with my Brompton on tour. That's the lock that I like. Auto lock. Not a sponsor of the show, but I have enjoyed their locks and I lost it. I think it was a backer of, did they do a backer thing on, if they did, I think I did it. And I was one of the early people out of Portland, Oregon, if I recall correctly. I don't know if I used a 60-inch version of it. I used a smaller version and was just fine. Great locks. Really enjoy them. They're great for touring. Not a sponsor, but I like them. All right, let's see. Next up is February. the month that we are in. February in Florida is an antidote to winter. I mean, long story short, it was not the worst winter ever here in DC, but, it was wintry. And, I know that during the really bad winters that we get, having so much time off of the bike from a touring perspective, I find that the first tour of the year in the spring is a little bit wonky. I think that this is going to be a permanent tour for me. Maybe not just the Central Florida one, but I think going down south or going someplace warm for a winter tour, it just has to happen. I really liked how easy, simple, and inexpensive this tour was. So I could see Florida being a repeat situation for me going forward. It was really, really great. Next up on the takeaways, you will never be lonely riding a Brompton. I think this has been a takeaway for every single one of my Brompton tours. It's a conversation starter, man. I mean, they are fun little bikes. And, especially when you fold one up, and somebody sees you do that, they're like, what? You'll never be lonely riding a Brompton. There will always be somebody who wants to talk to you about it. Especially, they want to know how much it weighs. And then they try to lift it up, and then it's heavier than they think it is. And then they're oddly disappointed by it. Shrug. Next up on takeaways, I ride better with minimal brakes. I'm going to spend a second here talking about this. I think that everyone needs to ride their ride. I mean, it's literally part of the introduction to the show, right? It's a mantra that is a part of this show. And the idea that I have always had is that, I should take lots of breaks because I'll be fresher. What I have been discovering over the last, I would say, couple of years is I'm actually, I think, a little bit better not taking breaks. I think, well, I shouldn't say that. When I take breaks that are more than just a couple of minutes long, I tend to have a hard time getting back up to speed. It's harder to get back in the saddle for me. I don't know why. I know lots of people who are great. They'll ride 3-4 hours and then they'll take an hour off and then they'll hop back on the bike as if it's nothing. And in fact, they feel more refreshed. I'm not sure if I feel that way about myself. And this ride, if you look at, and actually, I'm not sure if the data from my Ride with GPS for my timing on the rides is in the embeds in each of the show notes. But when I looked at it, I spent a very minimal amount of time not riding as a percentage of the whole. It was really, really short breaks. And I felt great. Now, I don't know if it was because I was less loaded or whatever. Not loaded, like drinking loaded, but like less load on the bike. But I just think that ended up working out real well. So I don't know. I'm going to experiment with that a little bit more. I think that also when the weather isn't as hot, I think if I just pounded out miles and it was 90 degrees and high humidity, that the body core temperature goes up too much for me. Missouri was like that. So I think it's situational, but I think when conditions warrant, taking fewer breaks is better for me. I finished the day early. It feels good, and I really enjoyed that. So more to come on that, I think. And everybody rides a little bit differently, but that's just something I noticed on this ride. The next up is a dose of nostalgia is a good thing. Day 2. You probably noticed that I decided to go to Disney World. I didn't go to Magic Kingdom itself or go into any of the parks or anything like that. I went to a hotel bar that my buddies from law school and I went to and had a notorious evening right before we graduated from law school. And it was just fun to go back and to get a beer at the bar and just to kind of reminisce a little bit. Internally, I didn't have chats with anybody. Hey, back in '96, I did this. No, I didn't do that. But it was kind of fun, and it sort of was a sweet add-on to this tour in a really fun, cool way. And I'm finding that having that little bit of nostalgia on my trips really helps make them extra fun. Because this trip, I've never done this trip before. That's how I found that dose of nostalgia. For the Oregon coast, for the California coast, for the C&O. I have nostalgia just based on past tours. So when I go past campgrounds that I've been to, it's like, I remember this is the campground where I hung out with the guy who surfed bike bike the coast and surf the whole way, stuff like that. It's just kind of nice to have those elements to it. So a little nostalgia. It's always a little bit fun. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to have, I think. Next up, if you want to preserve memories on tour, file this all under duh, by the way. Shoot a lot of video, take a lot of pictures, maybe even record your thoughts for, say, a podcast or something like that. But the one thing that I would say is that you want to stay in the moment. I think that's one of the trickiest things about doing these tour journals and recording all of that video is that it would be really, really easy for me to focus on that element of it and miss out on just how great of a ride it could be. And there was one particular point in this ride, and I talked about it on the day 3, which was the episode that dropped yesterday as we're sitting here live. And that was when I noticed this little kind of dammed up area on the side of Nova Road there, and there were lily pads. And I stayed there and I took a little bit of a water break there. And there were periods of time when there weren't any cars for a mile or two in any direction. And so it was really quiet, and you could hear the chirping, and you could hear just the sounds of nature. And way, way off in the distance, I'm not even sure if the microphone picked it up, but you could hear a crop duster sort of circling off in the distance overhead, and when it was like a little propeller planes. And it was just this one nice, cool little moment that I think will be a powerful memory for me for this tour. So, I think it's great. I love the fact that I record all this stuff, not only just for you guys, I'm bringing you all along and doing it for the show, but I like going back and listening because I forget. Swiss cheese memory, man. I forget so many elements of these tours. So when I go back, and occasionally I'll for research or whatever, I'll go back and listen to a podcast or something regarding one of the tours. And it's kind of nice to have those memories preserved either in audio or in video or in pictures. And, I just think that that's all really great, but don't let that get in the way of having those kind of lily pad moments. So that's another takeaway for me. Last but not least, before we get into some questions and some Ask Me Anything, the final takeaway was I had a great time at the Orlando meetup. And because my voice was so shot for all of the episodes, I never got a good chance to give an appropriate shout out to Greg and Kenny and my man Big Rick at the bar. It was a lot of fun, and it was really, really cool to kind of hang out. So I want to do more of these, and even if it's just a few people, it's super awesome for me to have an opportunity to meet up with folks and whatever. And I know, I'm doing them in places where not everybody can necessarily get to or whatever, but if you get a chance and we're doing a meetup, come on by, because it's a lot of fun. And I really, really enjoyed it. And this year I've had such great opportunities to meet up with people, through the Miles of Portraits stuff, now the Orlando meetup, and, we're planning the Pedalpalooza thing. Really, really, it's something I want to do more of. So, and of course the live shows, which is really great. The live shows are kind of my favorite because I know that wherever you are in the world, if you got a couple of hours in whatever day that I'm doing and you want to come by, we can do this, which is just kind of freaking amazing right now that I can yak away towards my phone right there, and you guys can interact, which is really kind of fun and cool. So, but especially Greg and Kenny, thank you for coming by. It was a really fun time. I told a story, which I've decided I've never shared it. It came from one of my tours in the past, that for reasons that will become obvious when you hear said story, I can only tell it during meetups, because, well, you'll understand if you ever get a chance to meet it. So if you want to hear the mysterious story, this is sort of the mysterious James of my bicycle touring stories. I cannot and will not tell it on an internet-based mode of communication. And you'll understand when you hear it. Kenny and Greg understand. So come to a meetup and you'll hear the story, perhaps. That is the kind of takeaways for the Cross Florida tour. Long story short, it was a ton of fun. It was a great escape. It was, only 4 days worth of getting away from things, but, well, really like a week and a half when all was said and done, considering the virus that I got that destroyed my voice. But anyways, besides that, that was not the tour's fault. That was the plane's fault. That was the person who touched something that I touched on the plane or coughed in my direction or whatever. Anyways, I really, really think that Florida is going to be a part of what I'm going to do every winter. if only to make my touring kind of a year-round thing. So if you figure I can do a late fall tour up here in the Northeast, and I can do a winter tour, and then maybe do a spring tour somewhere in California or Oregon or something like that, well, all of a sudden, I'm touring year-round. And that's kind of the dream of everything, for me at least. So yeah, cross Florida tour, Central Florida, aces, man. Hey folks, here is the AMA segment. I just wanted to break in here in the flow of the live show and mention that the recording went a little south. So I am using a different microphone's version of the recording so that you can hear it all. Quality's a little bit less than it was for the rest of the show, but totally listenable. Hope you enjoy it. The first question from the chat room is from Jason Brune. Do you use the stock Brompton pedals or switch them to something more tour ready? My best guess, because I don't really know the answer, I think I've got the stock pedals with the one that folds. Well, you have to have one that folds, I think, no matter what. But yeah, I don't think I did anything special for the pedals. I will say the folks at Clever Cycles in Portland who built this bike, they actually added a couple of upgrades in the bike that I didn't ask for or wasn't expecting, including the Brooks saddle. I had asked for just the stock saddle, and they threw in the Brooks. I don't know if they meant to do that or if I'm not complaining. Zero complaints because I didn't own a Brooks saddle. But many of you know I'm weird. I don't get really big into super expensive saddles or super nice saddles, as nice as the Brooks is. I'm fine with stock saddles. And then I remember I looked back at my order too. I was like, oh no, they just upgraded me, which was really nice. Because trust me, I threw some other components into it that made this much more than a stock bike. As many of you may recall, I have a speed hub on there, which doubles the amount of gears that I have. So that my low gear is a pretty climby gear. It's not as good as on my other bike, but it's climby enough to get over most hills. On really steep hills like Big Sur and some other ones that I've done, I do tend to hop off and push for a little bit, but not terribly frequently. I can usually do pretty good, even fully loaded. So this is a bike that can tour. But you know what? I think the pedals are a little on the heavy side, so I could conceivably swap them out. But I've got no complaints. They're very grippy on the bottoms of my shoes, I find. So I like them quite a bit. In fact, I think I like these pedals better than the junky stock pedals I have on my other bike. Pedals and saddles, man. I don't go too crazy about them. And I just do platform pedals. I don't clip in or do anything like that. GT in the chat room asks, what kind of podcast do you listen to when touring? Great question. I listen to the Sprocket podcast. Definitely. That's a favorite. I just listened today to their most recent one, which was a bicycle touring board game that they played with their guests. I listened to all 2 hours of that. That was fascinating. I'm like, I want to play this game. It looks really cool. Maybe I'll try to find a copy of it and we'll do that with a group at some point. It seemed really cool. Other podcasts, let's see. I love, I think I did an episode way back in the day on some of my favorites. Love 99% Invisible. That's a really good one. It's about design that's hidden in the world. I tend to listen to some kind of newsier podcasts, of any variety. Like Washington Post puts out I think it's called the Daily 202 that comes out every morning. That's pretty good for like kind of just like a daily news fix. I love the Sports Ball, so I listen to a couple of Buffalo Bills podcasts. Is there a Syracuse? There is a Syracuse podcast, but I don't think I listened to that. Let's see, what else do I listen to? I listen to a lot of stuff from The Ringer. I like their entertainment stuff. I like their things. Gimlet's got a bunch of good ones. I love Reply All. I'm hoping that their sale to Spotify doesn't impact those shows. I think that those are really, really good stuff. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of good stuff. I get into some of the true crime stuff every once in a while. Really like Dirty John. That was really good. The one about Theranos, the scammy blood test company. There's one that I think ABC News is putting out right now that's pretty good. I think it's called The Dropout. That's pretty good. So I listen to a little bit of everything. I also listen to music, of course. And on this ride for the first time, I talked about it, I think, on day 3. I listened to chill hop music, which is sort of like, gosh, somebody asked how to describe it. It's okay. So hip hop beats, but low tempo. And there's often like a little bit of jazz or like sort of like almost like
older music, like almost loungy kind of music that's overlaid on top of it. Really got into that, especially on Nova Road, that really rural road. There was just something, it just got me into the rhythm. I work to that kind of music a lot lately, because there's usually there's no lyrics or anything like that. So that was pretty helpful. And Nirvana. So there you go. So podcasts and music, that's what I listen to. Moving on to some of our email contestants here. From John S. Any chance of doing a multi-day tour on a trike? Seems like there's more of them on trails, especially us gray hairs. Look, I'm joining the gray hair, gray beard club slowly but surely here. So I will not have you denigrate the gray hairs and the gray beards. Trikes. I've never ridden one. I don't know a thing about them. However, I was just at a bike show recently, and I briefly interviewed a maker of a recumbent trike, and got a little bit of audio that I'm hoping to put into a future episode about touring and things like that. I would love to learn more about it. I don't own one. I would love to get out on one and see how it feels. Of course, I had Jasmine Reese on the show, and she swears by it. She was unable to continue bicycling because I think it was wrist issues that she had, and she moved to that recumbent trike, and that just made all the difference for her. So, I think that they are excellent. It goes back to the ride your ride kind of a thing. If that's the type of pedaling vehicle that you want to use and you get into, man, more power to you. I think I could see myself going to those at some point. I would love to try it just to see what it felt like. I think they seem kind of cool. But yeah, definitely want to do some more episodes on stuff that I don't necessarily do myself. So getting some more guests on the show, and maybe I'll have Jasmine back on to talk a little bit more about it, because she's cool. She's a great ambassador of the recumbent trike. Let's see. Next up, we've got from Brian B. I think that's Brian, who's also in the chat room as well. I'm assuming, Brian, when you are out on tour, are you seeing more people using the 650B/27.5-inch format? That's referring, of course, to your wheel size, your tire size. If so, are they riding mostly gravel or pavement? Okay, the person that is, I think, spending the most time on, I'll say, wacky tire size, and that makes it sound like that I'm denigrating it. It's just that it's tire sizes that aren't the usual 700C or 26 inches. I think here in the States, 700C and 26 inches, those are the two tire sizes that you see the most. I think for touring, you tend to see 700C be the dominant one. That's roughly a 29er. In fact, I think you can fit 29er wheels on it. People who are real bike shop folks can chime in and tell me if I'm right on that. The person who's really been chiming in a lot on these different size tires is Russ Roca over at Pathless Pedaled. He's been doing a bunch of videos over on the channel, and I don't know if many of those have made it to his podcast. I think because the podcast is mostly the interviews. But check his stuff out, because he's actually riding a lot of these different sized tires, and different sized tires will have different kind of value on different surfaces, like you talked about. The hashtag Highway Vagabonds chimes in with the hashtag supple life that Russ throws out. I think he's making like swag with that, man, making the merch with it. I think that's awesome. Hashtag supple life. I haven't found a compelling reason to try those wheel sizes myself. Mainly because then when you change the size of your wheel, you gotta monkey with all sorts of other stuff in your bike. And obviously the Brompton, again, for the podcast people, I'm gesturing. For live show people, you can see me gesturing. You're at 16 inches or bust on the Brompton. That's just how it is. So I'm 700C and 16. So I have a wide difference in my tire type. So for me, I have not seen, mainly because I'm not questioning a lot of stuff, and I'm not sure if I would notice a 650B. 650B was the one you were talking about, and I don't think I would notice it unless I was like right up next to it and could compare it to my 700C, because it's not a huge difference. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw more of those on the C&O if I paid more attention. But yeah, it's largely going to be kind of what you're used to and what you want. I know the bike packing type of folks may be moving more towards those kinds of things. I think, again, I'm a little bit ignorant on these, largely because I haven't looked into them super, super heavily. What I know is what I've kind of gleaned a little bit from Russ's stuff. So go check out Pathless Pedaled for more on that, Brian, because I think that we're seeing more unique wheel sizes. It's one of the other kind of trends that we're starting to see. And I think that we're starting to see some more differentiation based on surface type that you're going on, which I think is great. One thing that I would say that if you're into more expedition style touring or long distance touring, I think that there's an argument that could be made that you should stick with either 700C or 26-inch wheels and therefore tires, because those are the types of wheels that you can get virtually anywhere. You could roll into a Walmart or a Target or something like that and get those tires. You may not be able to get a 650B tire if you needed to replace it. Would that come up a lot? Who knows? But if you're one of those types that's going to be doing the Alaska to Tierra kind of ride, and you're in the middle of South America, I'd be on a 26 or a 700C myself, unless I did some more research and found out that you can get 650B tires any place. But my basic knowledge base, in rural parts of at least the US, you're not going to find those very easily. So, it depends on what you're doing and, what you're willing to do. Or you could carry one. I know lots of people carry spare tires, which it's a lot, man. It's a lot of extra to carry. All right. Keith Spangler has 3 questions. Friend of the show, Keith. Keith is in Vegas right now. He said he might be able to join. But if he's not, he's going to listen to this after the fact. Question number 1 from Keith in the Ask Me Anything segment. How important do you think it is to research routes prior to doing a trip? Referring your experience with quote-unquote low traffic routes, endless roads without services, etc. I think that this is going to depend very greatly on, are you a planner or a non-planner? I don't know how much I believe in astrology and all that, but I'm a Virgo, and Virgos apparently are big-time planners. I'm a big-time planner. So I like doing it. I like the process of planning it. It's the thing that gets me between tours a lot. Is I just enjoy sitting there on Google Earth or on Google Maps, Street View, going click, 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 going, oh, this looks like a good road, as I go along. So do I think that it's important? I think it's important if you deem it important. I don't think for so many people, Carrie Gross, interviewed her on the show last year. You remember her? She did that great podcast about her sort of research project that was married with a bike tour. She was not a planner at all. It didn't strike me. She was like sort of look at a map and go, hey, where do I want to go today? I'll go there. Oh, that's about an hour before I want to stop. I better start looking for camping. That's generally not how I ride. But I know it's how a lot of people like to ride, and they wouldn't dream of doing anything differently. That to a certain extent, the freedom of not planning is part of the joy of their bike tour. So I would say it depends on who you are and what your vibe is. For me, I'm a little bit more of a planner. I know that when we talk, Keith, I was about to refer to you, Keith, the person who asked the question. Keith, you ran into issues, I think, on some of your rides where you went to causeways which were absolutely not bikeable or not a good idea to bike. And so in some ways, a little bit of pre-planning, you might have seen that in a Google Street View or something like that. So I don't know, it just sort of depends on what you're willing to do. You made it work. You made it work great. And yeah, I think that's all that matters. I think you have to go with what your comfort level is. That's what I would say. That felt like a very non-committal answer, but such is life. Damed One Cated. If I'm mispronouncing your handle, please tell me in the chat room. Does the pictures in Street View ever take away or ruin a ride? Not for me. I would say that every time I get to a place where I recognize the ride that the fake ride that I did through Street View, I would say it's almost comforting. When I was starting off in Tampa, getting out of a city is always a little bit of a trick. It's like your right turn, go a quarter mile, left turn, right turn, right. You're kind of making all these turns. But because I'd already done that, I'd already visualized it a little bit. Man, it was so comfortable. It was just like, oh, this is the part with that tricky thing where I go under an overpass and then I turn right and then I got to make that first quick left. Like there's something about it that's a little bit more comforting. Like it's not a surprise, and I'm not waiting for Ride with GPS in my ears to go bong bong, which is what it does when I make a wrong turn or miss something. It's a little helpful to me, and for the most part, the stuff that I want to be a little bit more of a surprise are sort of the vistas and the views and the experiences of meeting people. The ride itself, I don't think I ever have had it be ruined for me because of Street View. I think it's only been enhanced, but your mileage may vary. That's what I would say. Getting back to one of Keith's questions, how did you think the little clown bike tire size impacted negatively or positively on your tour? People love to talk about those 16-inch wheels, man. I'll tell you. I would say the biggest thing that I noticed, and I did talk about this on the podcast, is that because they're inflated, this is like the what is the opposite of hashtag supple life? It's the non-supple tires. They are rock hard. You're supposed to inflate them to about 85 to 100 pounds per square inch. I don't know how many atmospheres or bars that is for European types and international types who go with bars. It's a lot of bars. And so you don't get a lot of cushion from those tires. That's the thing that I noticed the most on the Brompton. It does have a shock absorber that's sort of built into it. I have a very firm shock. I have the firmest absorber just because it's easier when you get out of the saddle. It doesn't kind of wiggle. I don't get any wiggle out of it, and it just feels, it's the most stable. So I would say that it's the high inflation of the tire, the high pressure that I notice the most. I mentioned this before. Smaller tires seem to accelerate a little bit more. Every once in a while that comes in handy. It's nice, but for the most part, I just don't notice it. I don't notice it at all. And especially once you really get going, man, you forget that you're riding on this teeny tiny little clown bike. And I think that's the genius of the Brompton. They're just so well engineered. They're so well built. They do really, really well. I've ridden, of course, my last, the touring bike that I had before the Brompton was the Dahan, and that was on a 20-inch tire. I would say the exact same thing. Yes, it's smaller than a 26 or a 700C. I didn't notice much of a difference at all. I just find that a good engineered bike, regardless of tire size, rolls really well. And the thing that I notice the most is, again, I inflate these tires a heck of a lot more than the wider tires that I have on the Safari. So that's what I would say about that. I would not let 16-inch tires get in the way of potential purchase of a Brompton for touring purposes. I think it works really, really well. Highway Vagabonds in the chat room. Ever considered tubeless? I'll tell you tubeless folks, you're evangelical about your tubeless tires. I've never done it. I've never considered it. I am intrigued with how passionate tubeless folks are, because it's amazing. I was just on in Facebook earlier tonight, and it's funny. There was one person who was just, there was a person who said, I had a problem with the stem on my tube, and somebody comes in and just be like, tubeless is far superior. I feel like that's sort of the hashtag for tubeless folks. Tubeless is far superior. I haven't tried it, and I haven't been tempted because I haven't had enough issues with tubes to go into it. And I'm intrigued with it. I just haven't felt compelled by it. And Highway Vagabonds says, love them, changed all bikes over to them. And that's the experience I think I see from so many folks who are into tubeless. Like once you're into it, man, done. You're in. I think that the one thing that I like about tubes is I can take care of it if something screws up in the field with no one around. I can carry extra tubes with me, and I can do that. And I get the impression that if something screws up with the tubeless setup, which is rare, exceedingly rare, given the way it's set up and the self-sealing and all that other kind of stuff, you're kind of hosed. And so it's one of those things that I very rarely get flats on tube tires because I roll with super thick, crazy ass bulletproof tires made by Schwalbe, right? So for the near term, for the here and now, I'm feeling pretty good about sticking with the tubed tires, but I'm intrigued and probably want to learn a little bit more because, like I said, you all are evangelical. You are, you are like, you're sold on the tubeless. You love it. You all love it. And I think that's really good. Yeah. And one other point from Highway Vagabonds, lower pressure, smoother ride. I mean, there's tons of really intriguing upsides to riding tubeless. And I think that the small possibility of something going sideways on a tubeless tire is still high enough that I haven't considered going that direction. But I may try it at some point, just because you all are so happy with your tubeless tires. I'll have to check it out at some point. All right, let's see. We got 2 more questions, unless anybody in the chat room wants to throw some more my direction as well. This is the last one of the trilogy from Keith. Can you mention how you recorded your on-the-road narrative, gear, etc.? I enjoyed the live experience and thoughts. I tried it on my Gulf trip, and you're making me want to listen to it again. I think it captures the quote-unquote real experience from the road. What I do is nothing fancy. And this surprises a lot of people. I use the Voice Memos app on my iPhone. Yes, the one that is stock that comes with it. I find that the microphone on the iPhone that's built into the iPhone is excellent. I use it as a field recorder. I use it for a lot of stuff. But most of what you hear, including the kind of weird scratchy parts, which drives me nuts in post, trust me, I wish I could get rid of it, but it's the white earbud, the stock earbud. Man, the microphone on that is really, really good for a field recorder, I find. And so that's why when you hear me riding, that's what you're hearing me on. I've tried all sorts of other things. I've purchased third-party microphones, and I've never been as happy with the audio quality as I am with the built-in one for the iPhone itself. Now, if you're not using an iPhone, you're using an Android. I don't know if I can speak to the quality of any individual Android app or the quality of the microphones in those phones. I presume they're pretty good, but really, really, really happy with the audio quality that I get straight out of the iPhone, and that's one less device to bring. I used to, back in the day, if you've been with the show for long enough, I used to do the tour journals in this quasi-live format before I folded it into the main show. I used to have a separate Pedalshift tour journals feed that if you're a newsletter subscriber, you would be able to listen to it literally within minutes of me recording it. And it was kind of this cool little setup where I used an app that put something in Dropbox, and then I had some technical little magic that would create an RSS feed, which is what make podcasts work, from those files. And it was automated, and it was really cool. And I got to the point where it's sort of like I was using all this data to get these audio files up for a handful of people who cared to listen to it that quickly. I like the ability now to edit and to kind of pull things together, although I do very little editing. Frankly, I think I dropped maybe a couple of recordings total. I tend to like you to hear everything that I'm talking about, even if it's dopey and confused, like so many of those segments were. I think it just is it's a realistic way of saying what it's like on a bike tour, and it brings you all along for the ride, which is really kind of the whole point. And I'm really happy to be able to share that all with you. And thank you to all of the folks who are either sponsoring the show or who are Pedalshift Society folks. I mean, you are the ones that kind of make that happen. So thank you. It's through your support that I've been able to fold it into the main show, and it's been great. And I used to sell them for $10 or something like that, and I'm just happier to have it get out to all of you now, rather than doing it that way. So thank you all collectively. Brian asks, how many podcast listeners do I have, and what's the size of the audience? Great question. It ebbs and flows a little bit. I think that it depends on how many episodes I put out. So this week I put out 3 episodes this week. So I usually get somewhere in the 1,500. It can go anywhere from as low as like 1,300. And again, this is over time too. If you're asking me the question of how many people do I get downloaded in 7 days versus 60 days versus, lifespan, episode 1 has had a metro crap ton of downloads, but it's also 5 years old. So, that's not, I would never use that as, I get 7,000 downloads of an episode, no. Typically, probably within a 60-day period, which is a good measurement, it's usually somewhere in around the 1,500, 1,600 Sometimes it'll be a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. It depends on the episode. But yeah, and it's funny. Lots of podcasters don't like sharing that. I mean, I have no problem sharing it. Plus, also, for folks who are interested in sponsorship, they like to know how many people are listening to the show, because if there were only like 5 of you, they probably would not be so interested in sponsoring the show. But there are lots of you out there, and that's pretty cool. It's kind of a interesting thing. I think I get overall. So if we're not talking about individual episodes, I think I had the statistics. It's growing, and I think that it's tens of thousands of downloads per month. Like I think we're getting close to 30. It was 15. I'm sorry, it was over 15,000 downloads of the whole run of the show. So that includes back episodes. People are catching up. Will be in a typical month, sometimes less, sometimes more. So your 60-day average is getting close to 30,000. So I mean, it's a lot, and it's all over the world, which is fascinating to me. I think I mentioned we were the #1 podcast in Malaysia, in the outdoor section in Malaysia just yesterday, which is fascinating to me. And the outdoor section competes with so many different podcasts. So like in the US, the Canadian, the UK, Australian charts, I'm never going to be able to compete with the hunting and the fishing and the stuff like that. But usually in the flirting with the top 100, which is great, fine by me. I just care that you guys like it. Frankly, I mean, it's kind of cool, and I'm interested in looking at it from a data perspective, and it's nice to see that people like it and are downloading it. And like I said, because I'm starting to get into I'm dabbling with sponsorships. The folks need to know how many downloads we're getting. So yeah, that's basically that. And it's a mature show, and it's still finding ways to grow. So tell your friends. That is the most important thing. We love having more of you. So tell your friends, and tell anybody who's interested in witty banter about bicycles that we're here. So, and if people like orange, I talk about orange a lot. I don't know. So that's that. Last but not least, let's see. Anybody else in the chat room? Okay, we've got the one non-bicycle touring question. Anonymous asks me, this is a tough one. Beatles or Stones? So do I prefer, I think the question was, the Beatles, or do I prefer the Rolling Stones? I guess musically, or like, I don't know. If you had asked me this question more than a few years ago, I think I would have absolutely just said, why, of course, the Beatles. Of course. Now I'm sort of like, why do you have to choose? But I will say, I have been getting more and more into the back catalog of the Rolling Stones over the last few years. I don't know what it is, but I think that golden era, that like 1968 through maybe like 70, 72 maybe, like, man, there was some good stuff that they put out. Gimme Shelter, and like the stuff where they got a little bit more like kind of political for the times and things like that. Really fascinating stuff. I love the bluesy bass to them. I would say you don't have to choose, but I will say that whereas before I would have definitively said Beatles for sure, I've gotten more into the Stones in later years, which is kind of weird. It is not of my generation. As you all know, I'm much more of a Nirvana guy, and them early 90s grunge acts, but I can get into it. I can get into the Stones, and I can get into the Beatles. I like all kinds of music. You hear, I listen to chill hop, for crying out loud. I can't think of anything that's more different than Nirvana than chill hop. I don't understand most pop music of since the last 10 years or so. Not that it's bad, but I feel like I finally punched the old man card maybe a little while ago, and it doesn't resonate. I mean, but to each their own. I celebrate all forms of music, even country music, because my girlfriend makes me listen to it. I'm going to yet another Garth Brooks show. This will be, I think, my 14th Garth Brooks. I've never seen any act 14 times, but I'm seeing Garth Brooks apparently 14 times. Pittsburgh in the spring. Very excited about it. Folks, that is the end of the show. I wanted to thank everybody for all of your questions, including my massive non sequitur at the end there regarding music that pulled me into Garth Brooks and I guess into modern pop music as well. Thanks so much for joining. I'm really excited to have shared all of the Cross Florida stuff, Florida Week stuff with you. It was a really great trip, and I'm really excited to have been able to share it with you.
And as always, we'd like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows, meetups, and tour journals. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Delcadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buckin, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, John Mayer, Sandy Pizzio, Richard Patch, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Dave Roll, Joseph Quinn, Susan Brewster, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robert, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Avidas Reyes, and new to the society, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, and Dan Gebhardt. And thanks also to all past and anonymous contributors for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available. A big thanks to Hawbuck Dyneema Wallets for sponsoring this episode. Go to hawbuck.camp to learn more about the ultralight high-tech wallet I carried on the Cross Florida tour.